Alright, now let's crack open the Disney vault again and talk about a movie that's arguably one of Disney's biggest flops. The Black Cauldron. Now, The Black Cauldron is Disney's 25th animated feature and is an interesting experiment approach when it comes to Disney animated features because Disney's no stranger to medieval fantasy. They've dabbled in this before with Sleeping Beauty, Sword in the Stone. You wouldn't really think of it as a risk, but here they're not just adapting a fairy tale or a simple story. Here they're adapting a book, and not just a one-off book. This is a book in a series of books called the Chronicles of Prydain, and they were very popular, and Disney thought they could make a movie about it. And after watching this movie, I feel like the Chronicles of Prydain was just the wrong property for them to adapt. If they wanted to do a sword and sorcery kind of movie, they needed to pick something that had a definitive beginning, middle, and end just for its own story. Because watching it, you could say that they were setting up sequels with this, that this was going to be the first franchise of animated movies, because up until this point, we really haven't gotten any animated sequels to Disney movies. They've always been just one-off separate projects that once that's done, they go to something completely different, and that's what keeps Disney fresh with different ideas. So I didn't really know what they were going for with this movie, because on the whole, it doesn't quite work. Now, there are things that I do like about it. I like the overall atmosphere and tone of this movie. It's in that classic medieval style of Disney animation like Sleeping Beauty or The Sword and the Stone, so that all has a very cozy feel about it. And the other big positive is the design of the Horned King. I feel like he's a great looking villain. You just look at this guy and you're like, okay, this is the Dark Lord of pure evil that lives in his castle with his army of soldiers at his beck and call. And just whenever he enters a room, there's mist and smoke and atmosphere, and he's just a really cool villain, voiced incredibly well by John Hurt, and when he has to deliver these intimidating scenes, he does a pretty good job at it. But as for the rest of the movie, well, it's a little all over the place. The movie opens up with some backstory on the Black Cauldron. What it is, it's this cauldron of evil, it's enchanted, it can raise the army of the dead. We get all that exposition super early on, and then we're introduced to our main character, Taran, and he is a pig farmer assistant, and this pig is not just any ordinary pig, it's a magic pig. It shows visions of things that are happening on the other side of the kingdom, and because of that, the Horned King is after it. And because Taran is a completely inept protagonist, he inadvertently gets himself and the pig captured by the Horned King. And they meet Princess Alanwe, who's also captured in the same dungeon, and they're escaping, and there's a third guy that pals around with them, Fluter, and he's a minstrel. It's actually a pretty difficult story to follow for a Disney movie. Disney movies are usually pretty simple, straightforward fairy tales or adventure stories, or just something with a beginning to end narrative, and this is not that. This is clearly them trying to cram way too much lore into one movie. Because having an ensemble cast like this with Taran, Alanwe, Fluter, and Gurgi, who's this kind of cute, cuddly, annoying as heck Gollum wannabe thing. They could work if their characters were fleshed out even a little bit and if they all actually contributed something to this mission. Because let's pick them all apart real quick. You have Taran, who is the protagonist. He's the one with the magic sword, so even though he's inept and he has no actual skills of being a warrior, he at least has that magic sword that can do all the heavy lifting for him, which on a character level isn't that compelling. And I know magic swords are kind of a staple in this kind of mythology, but at least make it so that he at least has to put some effort or some training in to wield this magic sword. Kind of like how Luke wasn't just immediately awesome at wielding a lightsaber. He had to train with it, he had to practice it, and you could see that as a magic sword story too. But at least Taran serves a purpose. He's trying to protect Henwing, his pig, from the Horned King, so okay, he's justified. Alanwe doesn't really contribute much except for, I guess, moral support. So aside from just facilitating that romance in this movie, she also doesn't really serve much of a purpose. She doesn't really have any skills or talents that are useful here. And then there's the most useless of all of them, Fluter the minstrel, who I don't understand why he's even in this movie. He contributes nothing. Maybe he's supposed to be the comic relief, but nothing he says is all that funny. He's an old man, he's slow, he's got no weapons or fighting experience. All he has is a harp that just keeps breaking on him. So really, they should have just left him on the side of the road. And then we have Gurgi. Gurgi is annoying and obnoxious. His voice really gets on my nerves, but I could see how kids might like Gurgi, think he's cute or think he's funny, and just like his design, because it is a pretty fun design, and Gurgi does contribute in this story, at least a little bit. Kind of like Gollum in The Lord of the Rings, he's their guide through the forest. So really this movie would be no different plot-wise if it was just Taran and Gurgi, and they didn't have any of the other characters helping them out. And that really is a big flaw in this movie. Why would you have all these characters when they just contribute nothing to the mission at hand? You look at the Fellowship of the Ring, or you look at Luke, Leia, Han, and Chewie in Star Wars. In each of those stories, every character in the ensemble contributes something, a unique weapon or skill set. And then we come to some characters that I forgot were even in this movie. We have these 3 witches here that they come across because they're looking for the Black Cauldron. They're trying to find it and destroy it before the Horned King can find it. And so this leads them to the witches. And these witches just leave so little impact on me because they're the 3 witches from Macbeth, or the Fates from Clash of the Titans, or Hercules for you Disney fans. There's nothing new or original about them. They try to give them a little bit of a gimmick with the bargaining thing, but that's not new. And when you look beyond the admittedly cool fantasy aesthetic of this movie, which the 80s was kind of a high point with children's entertainment having this dark fantasy feel about it, the Black Cauldron does that spectacularly well visually. There are some great looking shots of animation here, some great character design. It has that classic feel. But when you start to peel back, everything in this movie is just a slightly worse version of fantasy elements that we've seen in other versions. The magic sword here is just a less developed and less realized version of Excalibur. The 3 witches, like I said, are just a worse version of Macbeth. The ensemble is just a worse version of the Fellowship. The Horned King is just a worse version of Sauron. And the Gollum surrogates in this movie, which we have 2 of them, are Gurgi, who's the more helpful side of Gollum, I guess the Smeagol personality, and then you have Creeper, who's the more evil, manipulative side of Gollum, and he's more or less the Horned King's sidekick, which really makes the Horned King seem less threatening when he's paired up with this little gargoyle guy. And I guess when this movie was in production, there was a lot more of this movie that got animated, and it had a much darker tone than Disney was really prepared for. And Katzenberg, who was the head of animation at the time, cut a whole bunch of stuff, and a lot of people say that this movie fails because of all those cuts. And if Katzenberg had just left everything in there, it would have been a much more cohesive whole. But I don't know, maybe it could have been saved. But the stuff that I do see in here, even just at its bones, are not that well realized. It just feels like it's copy and pasted from other fantasy stuff that we've seen a million times, just with a real lack of originality and creativity to make it feel like its own world. And while I haven't read the Chronicles of Prydain books, I'm sure that there's a lot more interesting world building and unique justifications for things that just didn't make it in here, which is disappointing because I would have liked to see a more fleshed out version of this movie that really takes its time to establish the rules. All right, what is this sword? Why is it given to Taran? What's going on with this pig? What's going on with the Horned King? Is he the top of the heap, or is there somebody higher than him? Because by the end of the movie, you get the feeling that he is not all powerful like Sauron was in Lord of the Rings. But to end this video on a more positive note, when the Horned King does summon the army of the dead using the Black Cauldron, that is a pretty awesome sequence when you see the bones come to life. And it is pretty dark and macabre for a Disney movie, and I appreciated that. They really went there with this movie, and it didn't look super cartoony or cheesy. It actually had the weight and menace that an evil army of skeleton soldiers should have. Now this army doesn't really do anything. At least the army of the dead in Lord of the Rings that Aragorn summoned actually fought people, and there was an epic battle because of that. No, here they just kind of march around for a little bit, and then Gurgi sacrifices himself by jumping into the cauldron, and the curse is broken. The soldiers collapse. And I'll give credit to this movie too for killing off Gurgi. That was a bold choice, and the scene when he's about to do it is a pretty touching one between him and Taran, and you really do feel bad for the little fuzzball until they bring him back at the last second. That's right before this movie wraps up, we get another visit from the witches, and in order for them to take the cauldron back, they need a bargain, so they bargain for Gurgi's life, and all the weight of that sacrifice is kind of undone. So yeah, thanks Disney. And those are my thoughts on the Black Cauldron. I know it has its fans, and I can see why to a degree. There is a really cool, unique, dark fantasy aesthetic to this movie that fans of this genre are going to be really drawn to. And if you grew up with this movie and have a nostalgic connection to it, hey, more power to you. But for me, I didn't really watch this movie a lot growing up, and when I have visited it on occasion, more out of curiosity than anything else, because I like dark fantasy. It's a genre that I appreciate when it's done well. This just isn't done all that well, and it feels like a big tactical mistake from Disney. It's almost like if Disney tried to do an animated movie of one of the Narnia books, but not one of the big ones like the Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe. It would be like if they tried to do The Magician's Nephew because it's the first one chronologically, and then had no plans to do any of the other ones that people really enjoyed. That just feels like poor planning. That's how I feel watching this movie. There's not a lot to really grip me character-wise or even world-building-wise. It's pretty lame and forgettable, and when I watch all these different elements that just feel recycled from other movies, I just want to watch those movies instead. But now I turn it over to you guys. What do you think about the Black Cauldron? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments, and if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. As always, I'm Colby, this is my Nerdy Talk, and I'll see you in the next video.